Hi. I heard of this Wasi History TV on YouTube. Have you subscribed? Yes, I have. It's good. So I urge you all to subscribe to Wasi History TV.
So let's go there and find out our lesson objectives for today. So our lesson objectives for today will be that by the end of this lesson, you should be able to explain what historical sources mean. So if historians says historical sources, what do they mean by historical sources? You should be able to explain that to us. Then also identify the main sources of writing African history. You should be also be able to identify the main sources used in the reconstruction of African history. And then the third one, you should be able to explain and give examples of documentary sources of African history. So when you are asked to define or explain what a documentary source is, you should be able to do so. And more so when you are asked to identify some examples of documentary sources of history, you should be able to also do same as well. So let's go there and find out what do we mean by historical sources. Now, many rural areas in Ghana, of course, get their source of water from either a well, a dark well, or a river. And so when you ask what is the source of river or water, sorry, what is the source of water for many rural areas in Ghana? The sources of water is what? A well or a river. So the sources is where the water is gotten from. And so if historians use the term historical sources, one, it refers to the means by which historical information is gotten. And so the means by which historical information is gotten is what we term as sources. Again, by historical source, the historian also mean to say that the traces that the past has left behind, of itself in present, in the form of what a document. It could be artifact, it could be buildings, it could be castles and forts, it could be coins, it could be institutions, traditions, festivals, customs, and so forth. These traces of the past in the present is a very, very valid sources for the reconstruction of African history. So traces of the past. Let's take for instance the, of course, fort over here. When you look in the picture over there, you see a fort over there. This fort and castle you see over here are evidence. They are history. When you go to this fort, it gives you a lot about history. And what history can you get from these, of course, castle and fort? Mainly about Europeans' activities in West Africa. And that is why we say that forts and castles are also a historical source, because we get information from forts and castles. All right? Again, let's look at this. The festival. This festival is celebrated by the people of Ghana in modern day Ghana. And if you go to this festival, the Homo Festival, I guess, they would tell you the history behind this festival. Everything being done here is the reenactment of history. History taking place is what you see here. These are customs, the religious life, traditions of some group of people. All these artifact tells history. Look at this coin, for instance, over here. Has the image of Nkrumah, the first president of the Republic of Ghana. Over there, when you look at the inscriptions on the coin, they tell you something significant about that country. And that is what historians are looking for. Something like 1st July of 1960, and we have a Republic Day over here. What does that tell you? It tells you that that particular country, Ghana, became republic in 1960. It also gives you the first president. So you realize that these are sources where we get information for the reconstruction of African history. And that is why historians says that sources means the traces that the past has left of itself, all right, in the present, in the form of, it could be document, memos, diaries, and other stuffs, all right? And all these things provide information for the reconstruction of African history. And that is why we say that all these are sources of African history. So when you are asked to list or state any 3 or 4 sources used in the reconstruction of African history, I hope that you will not actually forget these sources that we have talked about. Good. So let's move on to what the sources of African history in general. Those are, of course, the sources, all of them put together, combined. But all those sources that we saw earlier or we talked about earlier are grouped into 2 broad categories. So all the first one, the fort and castles, the of course the documents, and all of them are sources. But we have grouped them under 2 broad categories, which are the documentary or written sources and also non-documentary or written sources. All right. So let's go back and see which of them do you think is documentary. Of course, when we say documentary, meaning something which is documented down or written down. Non-documentary meaning it is not, of course, written or documented down. So let's go there and look at the sources of history. So let's go back and find something. Which of these sources would you say is a documentary sources of African history? Which of them? Yes, guess for me. So if I asked you about the Quen, would you say it's a documentary source or it's a non-documentary source? If I asked you about the memos or letters, would you say it's a documentary source or not documentary source? If I ask you about festivals, the castles and all of that, is it documentary festivals and all of that? Is it documentary or non-documentary? Good, good. I will not tell you, but you will have to do that for yourself. So let's go there and look at some of the examples and see if your examples will be there. Of course, we already know that documentary sources of history are that of history that are written down or documented on a paper. So any sources of history that is written down or documented is what we term as what? Sources of African history. So let's look at some of the examples. So newspapers. Newspapers is a documentary source of history because when you pick a 1916 newspaper, a 1957 newspaper, it reports exactly what happened or what the country, the mood of the country at that time. All right. Most of the newspapers are also political-based newspapers, which mainly deals with politics, social issues, economic issues. And so when you pick a newspaper, it gives you information about what was happening or pertaining at a particular point in time. That is why we say newspaper is a source for writing what? African history. All right, diaries of important people, important personalities like Mandela, Kwame Nkrumah, Sékou Touré, of course, Gaddafi, Muammar Gaddafi will give you information into the life of such leaders. And we learn about these leaders. A traveler's accounts of course written by some of the Muslim, explorers and some European explorers, missionaries who came. They documented the things that they saw about African. And a lot of our history concerning our forefathers were all written by these people. Journals, reports of commissions of inquiries, which are normally set up by the government, party manifestos, government official records, minutes of meetings, which gives you accurate time, who said what, the date that anything, every decision was said, everything. Private letters, official reports of officers, court records, books, of course, books, and that's the most famous of the documentary sources of history. Then anniversary brochures, tributes, and magazines. All these things we are seeing here are examples of documentary source of history, because the information written in all these things that we have enumerated there are documented. That is why we brand all of them as documentary source of African history. So if you are asked to give any examples of documentary source of African history, you can write any of these examples for the examiner. Fantastic. Good. So we've come to an end with our discussion. If you have any question, My number is 0542083047. Let's have a chit chat over there. Thank you for your time. We shall meet some.
History